at the moment we are going through like a huge generational shift, and there's a lot of opportunity, but with opportunity, there's always a window that does end up closing at some point. So I do want to talk a bit about that opportunity today before we get started. So baby boomers in the UK, they own over half of the private businesses in the UK, and most of them, for a lot of the reasons why many of the speakers today have spoken, is because they're aiming for retirement, but none of them have any succession plan. And 5.5 trillion pounds of wealth is actually held by baby boomers in the UK. Is actually the largest transfer of wealth in history. So we've seen transfers of wealth previously. This is literally the largest in history. When you think about 5.5 trillion, that's more than some economies, actually most economies in the world. Over 300,000 businesses in the UK are estimated to change hands over the next 5 to 10 years. And again, it's simply because none of them really have an exit strategy. We speak to business owners all the time, and none of them are really set up for sale. And we're going to be talking a bit about this today. And as I mentioned, it is once in a lifetime opportunity, and this probably won't happen again. I'm quite conscious of not stepping on these, but you get to see it too. But a large portion of these businesses are actually debt-free, very profitable and completely under-leveraged, and unfortunately they don't have a succession plan. This is a bit of a visual of that the projected wealth transfer from 2020 to 2050. As you can see, the direction is going in, and as I said, 5.5 trillion is actually really hard to fathom how big of a number there actually is. So today I'm going to be talking about build, scale, exit, the entire process. Now, probably everyone in the room has gone through the build side of this, which is the hardest part. That's where all the pain is, right? Scaling and exiting they're like an art in themselves. I guess building is as well, but you're kind of like, it's just organized chaos. Things come up all the time. You have to consistently adapt to various different situations. But when you look to scale and exit, there's an art and a method to do both of those. But we're going to start with exit. I know people talk about keeping the exit in mind, but it's something that most people never even consider. It takes a long time to get to the point where you even consider exit. And when it comes to it, usually you're not really prepared because you think, I'll push that into the future because I have no desire to exit right now. And then they wait too late to do it. So appreciate Josh for putting this on today. For those that don't know who I am, my name's Dee. Just for you guys to know, I got no MBA. I had no investment bank or private equity experience when I started this. I pretty much just left school, worked for an IFA practice for a couple of months, realized it wasn't really for me. I was probably too immature at the time. I was just one of those like really hungry, aspiring like entrepreneurs that didn't really know what I was doing, chasing all the shiny objects. And just kind of dived into this by making a load of mistakes just purely through experience. But I guess that's the best way to learn. Now today, managing partner of 5D Capital Partners. We got an investment firm across UK, USA and UAE. We have acquired businesses in financial services, many subsectors of construction, real estate, e-com, automotive, biotech, consultancy and personal care. Very diverse. Wasn't the plan at the start, but it just happened that way. And also an accidental mastermind as well. I say accidental because it wasn't really the plan, but we're really proud of what we've done. Since inception, we've done over $100 million in acquisitions across various different countries and sectors, hosted events globally, we've got a real good in-house deal team, and now is an international network. But anyway, enough about me. I'm going to ask you guys a question before we get started. What do you guys believe determines business value? Anyone? There's no right or wrong answer. Demand. Anything else? EBITDA. Anything else? Yeah, well, all good answers, and there is no wrong answer to this because value is how we perceive it, right? But there are certain metrics that the marketplace deem as valuable when it comes to selling a business. So we're going to go through, firstly, 11 steps on how to actually maximize the exit value of your business. Now, first and foremost, some businesses, this is longer, but prep at least 24 months before sale because you want to give yourself a good runway. Now, some of you will need longer. Some of you may have a firm like Josh's where you're really proactive, all your financials are completely optimized, and you're in a bit of a different position. Remove the key man dependency. I think a few people's mentioned this today, but this is obviously going to remove a lot of the uncertainty post-acquisition rather than have all the key man risk on one individual. And of course, that does drive up exit value. I also appreciate that this is really hard to do. If you built the business around yourself, it's not as easy as just stepping away from it. A few days holiday is a good start, and then try and make that holiday longer and see how people react. And a lot of the time, Heather talked a lot about culture, and if you have a good culture, it's a little bit easier to implement things like this. 3 years financials optimized. I'm not going to talk too much about this because you're probably in the best room to find a good practice that can do this for you. Refine margins. Now, this is, of course, easier said than done. When people talk about just refining margins, there's an art behind that. You don't want to be cutting costs left, right, and center, and then actually compromising the quality of fulfillment on our product or service. So it's not a case of just cutting costs and running as lean as you possibly can, but it is try to see how efficient you are about delivering your product or service to the marketplace, and always keeping an eye on it too. High revenue per employee. Of course, this is going to vary between sectors, but it does show how productive and profitable you are, especially per each staff member. Now, looking at this, of course, it's not all revenue generating employees in a company, but everyone does contribute towards the revenue in one way, shape, or form. So it does try to start to see how efficient you're being at actually generating profit in the company, or all revenue in general per staff member. Lower the cash conversion cycle. I think Josh touched on this, but especially in construction, we see this upside down all the time. People chase revenue. Usually, they happy to compromise on margin to chase revenue and chase the big numbers, and then all of a sudden their accounts payable, accounts receivable are completely upside down. I think there's a few e-com brands in the room as well, and I understand inventory management is very, very hard too. So to get this right is hard, but is something you do need to work on, especially with your accountant. An organizational chart. This is mainly just as it says, a visual representation of the structure. So if you were looking to exit, at least a buyer can see what the key roles are. Is there any risk based on the roles? Is there any talent gaps in the business based on the conversations that they will have with you? We kind of do something a little bit different to this. I actually read a book called Output Thinking, and about 18 months ago, we've changed the entire way that we do this. Rather than create the outputs, rather than find the roles, we found it a lot easier to put systems and processes in place where if a team member leaves for whatever reason, because staff retention's very hard, I guess, unless you're Heather. But staff retention's hard, and it's hard to find the right people and put the right people in the right seat. So we've tried to move away from finding like great COO or great CMO and trying to create a really good output with a system that backs it. So someone's just coming in and following the same outputs. We find it a lot easier to attract talent that way as well. Asset register. Now, you'd like to think most people have one of these. Even if you're like a small tech company or you only have a couple of laptops, I do feel that this is really important, especially at some point when you want to sell. I doubt they're going to want the laptops, but you never know. But it's always good to have it in place and make sure you're organized. And also upside potential. So if for someone to buy your company, a lot of the time, 99% of the time, they're going to want to know that there's actually upside potential. Now, this is probably a bad example, but I'll use it as an example just so you understand it. Is if you had a care home, for instance, and the care home is at 98% occupancy, and I'm buying the care home, and I'm asking them, where's the opportunity for growth? And they said, well, we've got some space out the back. You can apply for planning, and then you can build an extension, and then there'd probably fit another 10 beds in it. Of course, the amount of additional cost that's going to go into the growth of that company is crazy. And of course, growth isn't cheap. Now, on the flip side, if you went and they said, we're at 65%, don't really have the energy to fill the extra beds, don't really want to recruit any more staff, there's some upside potential. Now, of course, we know there's a capacity on care homes, nurseries, etc., unless you scale to acquisition. But just to understand the concept that try not to, if you're looking to sell, someone is going to want to see that there is actually upside in the business as well. Balanced revenue split. So we don't really want to see much revenue concentration in the business. And I do appreciate that when people are growing companies, that a lot of them are geared towards one or two really good clients that have given them a lot of business, and they've grown and scaled rapidly because the other clients scaling alongside them. But the quicker you can diversify this, the better, because a buyer is just going to look at discounts left, right, and center. Because all they're going to say is, if you lose this client, you're going to lose, 30, 40% of your revenue. I don't really want to pay if there's a potential loss there, or there's various different ways through legal structure that they can protect themselves. So you want to try and diversify the customer list as quick as possible. Recurring revenue, just purely because it's predictable and regular income. Fortunately, we now live in a world where you can do this in most businesses. There's still a few you can't, but you can add some recurring revenue to most businesses now. So if you can do it, then great. Now, going through those 11 steps, you've got a pretty much a sellable business. Now, there is some other things, and trying to understand what is actually a sellable business. The reason why I put this image on the screen and a few images on there, just to add some color to this. So it's late in the day, didn't want it to be death by PowerPoint. I can see people fade in. The cheesecakes look good. I was waiting for after this, so I didn't fall asleep. But I know some of you have had some. So put some color on the slides. Now, talking about a sellable business, that's me and my two business partners. We was actually out in Arizona. We was looking at a few different HVAC companies. First of all, the time zone definitely didn't work for us. But we was over there, and the reason why we're celebrating and we're happy is because the HVAC mission didn't go very well. But a company that we was looking to acquire in Atlanta on the East Coast for probably about 18 months actually agreed terms about half hour before this photo. So we was really happy. Then the problem was, finally agreed price and terms with them. We went and spent 10 days in the business just to meet the team. They knew that most of the time you don't get to meet the team, so organizational due diligence is pretty much non-existent a lot of the time. But they allowed us to come and meet the team. We found out pretty much those 11 things I just covered, they had problems with about 8 of them. So it wasn't a sellable business, and those smiles quickly turned to frowns. But yeah, that wasn't a sellable business. But a sellable business is, first and foremost, it very much what Josh was talking about earlier, is a collection of independent systems that can be engineered to deliver exceptional outcomes, predictable, repeatable, and sustainable. Again, it's easier said than done, but I think it's important that you focus on tremendously high standards and have a very much a company-first focus when you're building, scaling, and looking to exit a business. Ensure there's no dependence on any specific team member. I really resonated with what Heather was talking about earlier on, because one, there was a lot of key man risk or owner risk in the business, but it's quite easy to then move that risk onto another member of staff. And the company we just talked about, the one which we stopped smiling about, we realized the owners had no key man risk, but they had this very young person that they just give him the COO sort of title, just give him a title, was paying him ridiculous money, 600 grand a year. He was 31 years old, but he basically run the entire company. Every single manager, every single member of staff was in and out of his office all day. There was huge risk on him. One of the issues we found was, we said, have you offered this guy equity at any point? And they said, no, he doesn't want it. He just wants to keep getting paid more money. So it's like, where does that stop? And, yes, he's definitely doing the work. It's a big company, 600K a year, though, was a pretty big salary for, a 31-year-old kid, So, but yeah, it is important to try and remove the key man risk, and again, mainly focus on the systems, and then the systems work and the people work the systems. Everything needs to get measured, and again, Josh talked about this. If you collect the right data, then the problems get fixed quickly. Now, one thing I will say about data is making sure you actually collect the right data, because you can collect a ton of data. I've seen some companies, they've got 20, 30 KPIs. The team are trying to hit all these various different KPIs, and they get lost because they're not actually focusing on the actual key drivers in the business. Those KPIs could probably be consolidated to about 3 to 5, especially the ones that are really the core focus on how you drive the business forward. So collecting the right data is very, very important. And of course, then that's when you can optimize and scale. And culture, I don't really think I need to talk about this. I think Heather absolutely smashed this one out the park. But it is the glue that binds the business together. And it's the one thing that is very hard. Putting the right people in the right seats is hard, but trying to build a culture in a business that everyone wants to turn up, everyone's happy to be there, and everyone's happy to grow the business with you, it is very hard to do, especially when you step out of it. And we also speak to a lot of founders that, when they do step out, the actual team prefer it. But they're just they micromanage, and they're in the business all the time. So culture is really, really important. Craft a compelling story. Now, anyone in here dealt with private equity before? So did they talk a bit about, have you sold to private equity? Right, so as you know, they love a story. They love a founder story or an acquirer story, right? So crafting a compelling story, as much as you might think this is, what's this, BS? Well, you make a story up. Trust me, the story makes a massive difference. They really love a founder's story. And the stuff that you think is irrelevant and no one wants to know, that's usually the thing that people actually want to know and makes them interested. And some of you in here may already have a business that's been through generations, in your family, and some may think and have no desire to sell it because you want to continue the legacy. Some of you may be building for your family and think, I want to build something that I never want to sell and I want to keep in my family. Now, and that's fine if you have no desire to sell. But I still think you need to build with the intention to sell, just because you will build a better business. If you build a business like that, with those 11 steps and all the things that we've just covered, you're just naturally going to build a better business. It makes it a little bit more fun as well when your business is better. And one thing I think you need to remember out of the exit part of this is the multiple expansion side can really make a massive, massive difference on exit. And at a low level, it means nothing. But when you multiply, this is crazy. So for the example here, very simplified example, if you assume an exit multiple of, say, 5 times EBITDA, so let's say you're selling for 5 times profits, every pound of profit you make will just multiply to £5, and every pound of cost you save multiplies to £5. So at a very low level, you make £1, save £1, all that multiplies to £10. When you're on exit and you're looking at 6, 7, 8 figures, that makes a crazy difference. Now, of course, when it comes to cutting costs, like I said, we don't want to compromise quality and fulfillment of whatever it is that we're selling, whatever product or service it is. But it's important to focus on this because, like the example Josh showed earlier on with that audit that he did for the company, to add 1.8 million to the bottom line just because they found things in the business that someone else wasn't looking at. That's probably everyone's business. There's always something in every company in the world that can be improved, regardless of who you are and what you do. And we've talked a lot about creating value. But value creation has changed massively recently, but it changes all the time. We've gone through many different eras of value creation. We've gone through financial engineering, we've gone through operational excellence, we've gone through the most recent one in human capital. But it's consistently changing all the time. And now more than ever with, technology's been in exponential growth for decades, right? But now with like the emergence of AI and disruptive tech, people that are making the tech can't even keep up with it. It's crazy. So, we're at a stage now where you have to consistently adapt and be agile. Now, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company used to be 67 years, right? That's the top 500 companies in America, some of the biggest companies in the world. That's not bad, right? Almost 7 decades, almost the life expectancy of us. Hopefully not, but there or thereabouts. Do you know what that is today? Anyone take a wild guess? Half? 15 years. That's crazy. Like that's a massive shift, purely because of the change of value creation. And I think you can all appreciate, I don't know if many of you have worked with, larger companies on boards. I'm sure there's plenty of you in the room, but a lot of like big PE, they move like the Titanic when you guys can move like a speedboat, right? You can make decisions a lot quicker. It takes forever to make decisions at a high level. So when things actually come up that quick decisions need to be made, and need to innovate, it's actually quite hard for them to do it because there's too many people they need to have a seal of approval off to do it. So a lot of the time they don't get to innovate quick enough, and then that happens. And we've seen it. And I think Netflix was a good example of what you mentioned earlier. Made me chuckle when I seen it. But I don't know about this. I said definitely a few of you in the room that remember Blockbuster. But Blockbuster was, when I was a kid, I used to love it. If I got a chance to go to Blockbuster on the weekend, me and my brother would go down there. And if you get a chocolate bar or something too, awesome. But I used to spend 25 minutes walking around the shop to pick a video or DVD back then. And you'd be happy. Right now, you're on Netflix. I spend double the time looking for what to watch and then fall asleep before I decide to watch it. But when it comes to innovation, Heather talked about this earlier on, but Blockbuster had a chance to innovate and they decided not to, and then we've seen what happened, right? And unfortunately no longer here. But this happened loads of times in history. So back in the 70s, there was a Kodak engineer that actually invented the first digital camera, and which is crazy, right? Imagine inventing the first digital camera. He took it to the board, and the board just shut it down and said, unfortunately, this is probably going to cannibalize our print business, so we're not going to roll it out. Then, unfortunately and eventually, they filed for bankruptcy. So we see this all the time when people, try and show a lot of resistance or, give a lot of resistance to just change and innovation, and you have to learn to adapt. So that's the exit side of this. So like I said, it's important to build with the intention to sell because you will build a better business. But to move back to the building and scaling, you can also fast track this part too. Now, like I said, everyone in here has probably built a business, right? Everyone's a business owner in here, right? Awesome. Okay. So everyone knows the pains of a startup as well, right? You start out very optimistic. You believe that you're about to deliver something new to the marketplace or better to the marketplace. If you didn't, you wouldn't have started the business in the first place. And then usually, unless you get lucky, a few months in, that optimism gets punched in the face by realism, and you start to realize, shit, I need to pivot here because this isn't exactly what I thought it was going to do. So that's the building part, and it becomes very, very hard. So if you can get past the first part, the scaling part is a completely different thing in itself. However, when it comes to scaling, the most cost-effective way to grow a business and create value is to not lose the business that you already have. Now, I think we all get it, have all probably been in that position where you gain a bit of momentum. A lot of people you get a lot of demand for the thing that it is you're selling, and then you focus so much on hunting that fulfillment usually gets left behind a little bit at one point. Then you have to try and balance it out. It becomes very, very hard. But there's a study done out of Boston MIT, and they worked out that acquiring a new customer can be up to 25 times more expensive than retaining an existing one. Now, when you're talking about hunt, I think every business needs to have an element of hunting and farming. You should be waking up every month if you can, and you have the capacity to scale. Hunt, look for new people every single month, new customers, but look after the ones and farm the ones that you already have, because it's cheaper to sell to them again than it is to go and find a new one. And otherwise, this ends up happening. You have a leaky bucket, okay? And that's why sustainable growth does require dual focus on pouring more water into the top, but also patching the holes at the bottom. Now, this analogy is, think about the hose pipe going in the top of the bucket, filling it up. That's the new customers, but what we want to do is patch all those holes so it fills up and we get a new bucket. We fill that up, get a new bucket. We don't want all the customers to be churning out the bottom, because 90% of churn actually happens at the time of sale, which is crazy when you think about it. That's when the buyer's remorse is most likely going to happen. But immediately after someone's bought something, that's when most of the churn happens. So it's important that we understand what our customer expectations are at as early as possible. Now, another study was done through Bain & Co., which is one of the biggest consultancy firms in the world, which this is a very interesting one. So they went out and spoke to a ton of companies, and the companies they spoke to, 80% of those companies said that they believe that they deliver a good service to the marketplace, which, you'd like to think if that's what you've got a company, you want to hope you're delivering a good service. So I don't know where the other 20% of companies actually are today, but 80% of them believe they deliver a good service. Now, they went out and asked the customers of some of those companies the same question. What do you think the percentage was of the companies, the customers of the companies that believe they received a good service? Anyone? 30? 20? 8. Now, how crazy, we've got a 10x difference in expectations from customer to business owner. So we do have to be in touch way more, especially when you're going through the scaling phase of being in touch with what you actually deliver into the marketplace, and if your customers are actually happy with the service. Because you think they are, because they probably haven't said anything. But we've probably all done it, bought something off an ad online. You're thinking, I'm never buying from them again. I didn't like the way it took too long to deliver, or the quality wasn't good enough. You just move on. But they think that they've just got a new customer. So it is important. That's why someone like Amazon's so good. The follow-up process is actually quite annoying, but it's so good. You order it, you get an email straight away, get an email when it's dispatched, email telling you outside the front door, email say it's been delivered. It's constant, but it's such a cool process. You don't need to ask where your order ever is, because you know that they're 100% going to be in touch with you, and they're going to follow up to ask if you was happy with the service. So now, talking about scaling, and as I mentioned, there is an art to scale, and everyone wants to get things very, very quickly. And I think that we should think in decades and we should think long term, but there is a much faster way of doing things. And in this case, people say that the fastest way to scale isn't always the best way. But what if the fastest way was the best way, but also the safest way to scale? Now, for me, the fastest way to scale is to buy another business. Think about the decades of... How many people in here have had the same business for over 10 years? A few of you. Over 5 years? Most of you, right? How hard was that first 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, even 10 years? It doesn't get easier a lot of the time, okay? So imagine when you found a business that's very similar to yours, or maybe ahead of you, revenue-wise, infrastructure-wise, and you acquire everything that they have, and you can do it very cost-effectively, rather than going through, they've already done the 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 years of, we bought companies that are 65 years old. You know, plenty of people that in our group have bought companies that are much older than them. You know, you're buying stuff that was already being built before you was here. That's a complete cheat code if you can get it right. Of course, it has to be done correctly for you to make it work. Now, there's two ways to do this. You can either grow organically, which of course is still a good way, but I think we all know that growth definitely isn't cheap. You know, the amount of business owners that we speak to, that, you know, they'll say there's a lot of upside potential. We could double our revenue overnight if we wanted to. We just don't want to do it. And we don't do the perfect ones. We don't do marketing yet. It's like as if you all of a sudden do marketing and you're going to all of a sudden 10x the business. But so growth isn't cheap. So there's a reason why a lot of companies don't do it, or they struggle to do it because they don't get the foundation right in the business. You have to hire more staff, increase marketing, product development, new equipment. It all costs money, especially when you grow organically. Now, when you grow through acquisition, it's very different because, as I mentioned, you can tap into existing infrastructure. There's already a customer list, there's already a revenue stream. Now, when you think about a startup, right, first of all, you know, I think, you know, as a fact, right, I think most fail in the first 5 years and then only a third actually make it to a decade. So startup is hard anyway. Now, when you start a company, first of all, it's an idea. The idea becomes reality, and then you build a brand, and to get customers, they need to trust you as a brand and trust the product or service that you're selling. Then when you have the customers, you've got to try and retain them. Then you've got to get enough customers to have enough surplus cash to hire people, to delegate. It's a very, very hard process, and I admire anyone that's gone through that phase because, you know, when I left school, I started a ton of companies and failed most of them, but, you know, you wear all the hats and you learn a lot and you learn how not to do it. So, you know, you get existing infrastructure, customer list, a revenue stream, plus decades of hard work. Someone's already put in the hard yards, already put in that blood, sweat, and tears. You know, it is a hard one. So I'm going to give you a bit of an example of one of our deals and how we structured it. And when you buy a company, the art of buying a company comes purely from deal structure. Now, there's plenty of people out there there's tons of YouTube stuff now where they're like, you know, find a company, pay 3 times for it, give them a bit day one and a bit over 3 years. If anyone is actively buying companies in the current environment, that's almost impossible to do it that way. Interest rates, the interest rate environment we're in now doesn't allow the free cash flow or the debt service cover ratio to be where it needs to be to structure deals in that way. You have to be creative. You have to understand how to structure those deals. So this was a construction company. Turnover was 12 million, then 1.5 million EBITDA. Purchase price for us was 1.7. And again, many of you may look at this and think, why is it so cheap? What was wrong with the company? Now this, again, we get to the root cause of why someone actually wants to sell. So this was a husband and wife, built a good business. The wife was more commercially minded. The husband was like the ground worker. He managed the team. Now she had just had a huge inheritance. They just built their dream house and she wanted to open a little sandwich shop in their village. It's crazy, but that's what she wanted to do. We actually found out then that it always starts with price, and then you start to work out what someone actually want or need, why they want to exit their business, and, you know, what that looks like for them. So we got to the root cause. We realized she wanted to completely out. She was doing a lot of stuff that she probably didn't want to do. He wanted to stay around, but he's like, I just don't want to be a business owner anymore, but I want to stay around. Now, usually that doesn't really work for us because it's hard for someone to go from owner to employee. It's hard for them to want to stay and be hungry or take direction. But it was a little bit different in this circumstance. So we agreed 1.7 million for the business. They wanted 1 million up front, and then we deferred 700,000 over a period of time. Now we split the deferred payments up. So we actually split it up into 300,000, which was guaranteed over 5 years, and we put 400,000 in it on performance. Now, the reason why this helps so much is because first and foremost, we're paying a very little multiple for the business, but we're spreading the terms over a longer period of time. So the free cash flow ultimately goes up if you do it that way, rather than trying to get it all done so quickly and then there's no margin for error. Now, the reason why there was a £400,000 earnout is because they'd just been added to a couple of frameworks and government contracts, and they had quite a big pipeline with a lot of house builders. I don't really like house builders as clients. They can be great, but a lot of the time, as the relationship goes on, they kind of dictate margins. They end up taking up a ton of percentage of them as on your customer list and become very hard to work with. So we put a bit of it on an earn out. So there's actually only guaranteed 1.3 million for the business, and they did 1.5 million a year. We negotiated 600,000 of working capital to retain in the business, so 600,000 of cash. Working capital is a conversation you definitely want to have with your accountant, because this is usually one of the problems when it comes to negotiating deals, just purely because people look at it as two different things. Some people seem to think that every single penny in the business is theirs, and that's not the case. The working capital is an asset to the business, and other people think that their payment terms could be 60 days and their debtor days could be 90, and they're saying, you only need 15 days of working capital to run the company. A lot of people become they have a little bit of they live in noddy land when it comes to negotiating working capital. So in my opinion, just get the accountant on it sooner rather than later. Now, this has changed since this deal was done. So the R&D credit, you still can get R&D, but it's like half of what it is now. So they'd never claimed R&D ever. And there was a lot of scope to claim R&D. So we had like a pre-approved R&D credit of 300,000 that, now, if any of you dealt with an R&D advisor before, you do have to be careful which ones you talk to. There are a lot of sharks out there, but also a lot of them will say we can get you in 7 days, and then 30, 45, 60 days later, you actually get the money. So we just know that post-acquisition, let's say maximum 60 days after, we're also going to get an additional 300,000 of cash dropped into the business as well. Now, the capital stack on this one, just so you know, there was 1.2 million of assets in this company as well. So the liquidation value was pretty much exactly what we paid for the business. Now, we took 900,000 from on an invoice facility, and we put 100,000 of our own money into the deal. Now, even if you didn't have 100,000 to put into this deal, we could have leveraged the assets and just done it completely no money down. But I'll show you for why we didn't in a sec. So first of all, could we have taken out our working capital? Potentially, maybe it would have put some strain on the company. But, could we take it out after 60 days when the R&D credit drops in? Probably. But after all debt service, the net income on the company is 1.1 million. So you're doing like £83,000 a month in profit anyway. So the 100,000 is going to be able to be taken out very, very quickly anyway. But could it have been done no money down? Yes, it could have. So I'm going to show you now, because if no one's ever looked at buying a company before or looked at financing structure or blender finance before, I'm just going to show you a very, very simple format of how you can look at this and why we look at debt finance as the last possible thing that we look at. So most people, when they buy a company, they just go straight to the bank and say, what can I get? So I want to buy this company. We look at that as the last worst case scenario. So for this example, say the EBITDA is 200,000. There's existing debt in the company of 150,000, and let's say the purchase price is 500, and the structure is we're going to pay 50% day one, and then they're open to flexible deferred payments, because it's pretty irrelevant for this example. So as you can see, the chart represents the price at the bottom in 100,000 increments, and then we're going to look at the financing options on the side. And because we're paying 50% day one and 50% after, the jagged line represents where the 50% is. So our first option is seller finance, where the seller finances part of the deal, or you're going to pay out of the cash flows of the deal after you've bought it. Earnouts fall under this as well, and a few other things, but for this example, we're going to use earnouts as another finance option. Existing debt in the company. Now, a lot of people look for cash-free, debt-free deals. And you can do that. If the company's been suffocated with debt, then of course is a good option. If the company has the debt and it's already servicing the debt comfortably, still making a lot of money, then especially in the environment we're in now, it's actually cheaper to acquire the debt than it is to go and get new debt or acquisition finance. So providing there's no change of control clause on the debt in the company, you can acquire the debt. A seller drawdown. A lot of people don't like this, especially whether you talk to, accountants, tax advisors don't usually like this, but the environment we're in now, it is hard, and it can be hard to go and find finance, especially if you're looking at smaller deals. So there is an option on the smaller deals with various different options out there, like the GGS. You can get a seller to draw the money down in the company pre-close, sign 2 separate agreements, they'll take it out on close, and then you acquire the debt. You acquire the debt when you buy the business. Investor, you know how that works. Earnout, we've just talked about that. That's where you tie a portion of the a consideration to performance, or then there's a bank loan, which is debt finance, asset finance, invoice factoring. There's tons of different things you can do, but a loan facility. So in this case, we know that 50% of this is getting paid on close, 50% as a part of the deferred consideration. So we already know that 50% of the deal's funded immediately. We know there's 150 grand of existing debt in the company. For this example, there's no change in control clause on the debt. It makes it easier. So we know 150,000 of that's going to be acquired day one. So now we've got 100,000 shortfall of a £500,000 business before we even start. Now we can exhaust all these options. So can we go back to the seller and say, cost of capital is pretty high. Do you mind putting a bit more of this on seller finance? They're probably going to say no, because they're going to say, well, I'm going to get taxed on the entire sale straight away, so I need some money. So maybe that's exhausted. Existing debt, could we look for them to draw some more debt down in the company? Maybe. Is it probably the best thing to do? Maybe not. Can we go to an investor? Maybe they have the appetite for it. We don't know. Can we tie it to performance? For this example, we don't know what the company is, so maybe. But could we fund it with a bank loan? Now, if you look at just a basic cash flow loan, when it comes to acquisition finance, you can get up to about 2.5 times EBITDA. The fact we're paying that for the company, technically, could you finance the entire thing day one? If the circumstances was right, yes. It's on a deal by deal basis. But could we bridge £100,000 worth of debt finance on a company that's throwing out 200 grand? Is highly likely that you could. So that's how you would create, say, a no money down scenario. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this is because when people go out to buy companies, they instantly just think of dollar signs, right? They think it's going to cost me a load of money. Why would that person that's doing £1.5 million profit sell to me? That's what most people, it's hard to get over that barrier. A £12 million company, you're thinking, if you're doing, say, 1 million or 2 million, you're like, how am I possibly going to go and buy a company much bigger? Now, the reason why I think is easier is because we talked about culture, we talked about teams and removing key man dependency out of the business. If something already has management structure, can already operate without the owner in the business, then when you're going into that business, you're not going there, sitting in the boardroom, telling everyone what to do, changing things. Most of the time, for the first 90 days or 100 days sometimes, we don't do anything. We just let it continue the way it is. We try and find out where the constraints are in the business and then see what improvements we can make without damaging culture if the culture is good in the business. So a lot of the time, you're not going to do anything to start with. So when you create, can you buy companies bigger than yours? Yes. Can you buy companies in general? Yes. Is there a stigma around the whole no money down thing? Yes, there is. The difference with this and, say, property, for instance, property is very like you kind of know what you're going to get in regards to lending with property because it is what it is. You can get so creative when you buy a company to the point where you can almost force a deal that you probably shouldn't do because you can get that creative. So sometimes you do have to hold yourself back and be like, is this what I want to do? Because you can get very emotionally attached to deals very, very quickly. So talking about build and scale and exit, I think we've gone through all three of these now. So the quickest way to build and scale, in my opinion, is definitely through acquisition, even if you don't even own a company, which you all do. I've helped people at like 21 years old. They bought companies off people that late 60s, and it was very hard to get over the fact. I know Denzel mentioned earlier on that being young is sometimes a bit of a sticking point for someone. But I actually believe, we're in a world now where, as Heather mentioned, that age doesn't really matter. But I've seen a friend of mine go through a lot of hassle with an aging entrepreneur because they're like, how are you going to run my company? I've been running this for 30 years. How is someone in your age with no experience, never been in business before? He was a carpenter at the time, He's like, how are you going to do this? Since then, he's doubled the EBITDA. The company's thriving just because he stepped back, let the people do their work, and then looked at the constraints, got a real good proactive accountant on board, got full visibility of the financials, what the business is doing, and track what the key drivers are. And it's not rocket science. Is it hard? Yes, of course it is. Nothing's easy, but you can do it if you approach it with the right manner. Now, I'm going to finish up on this. Is anyone familiar with the Red Queen effect? So the Red Queen effect is an analogy of a business where you have to constantly adapt, be agile and innovate just to stay in the same place. And I feel like that's where we are now. As we talked about earlier on, value creation has changed. We looked at like the emergence of disruptive tech and AI. I feel like if we don't be open-minded to innovation and just adapting in general, we are just going to stay in the same place, or go backwards. And I think the fastest way to get the things that you need to scale your individual company is to buy something else, buy something that already has those things. And what you will find, if you do decide to go on an acquisition journey, you start to find out the way other people are running the companies, and you end up taking things what they've done and spent 20 years building and making it work better than yours, and you take that into yours, and your existing company becomes better. And then of course the group structure becomes even more useful at that point. So I'm going to leave it on this, because business is just a game that rewards those who learn the rules, build the systems, and play with discipline. So guys, my name's D. If you want to follow me on Insta, I try and put out some valuable content here and there on Insta and YouTube. But yeah, I just want to, before we finish up, I know we're doing a panel, but guys, if everyone can give Josh and the whole team a massive round of applause, because this was incredible for a first event. Honestly, mate, really, really good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Very much. And we give D a round of applause as well, because he missed himself there.